The war between the Varelian Empire and the Dravari Dominion had burned across the stars for nearly 12 years. Entire star systems had turned into graveyards. Trade routes were shattered. Colonies that once thrived with life now floated as silent debris fields beneath distant suns. What began as a dispute over a single mineral-rich moon had grown into something far darker, an endless cycle of retaliation and destruction. And at the center of it all sat the throne world of Varelia Prime. Inside the crystal halls of the Imperial Palace, Queen Lysera Vaurin stood before a massive holographic war map that stretched across the chamber like a glowing galaxy. Red lights flickered across dozens of systems. Every one of them represented another battle lost. Another fleet destroyed. Another 1,000 lives gone. Behind her, the Empire's highest council stood in uneasy silence. The Queen's voice broke the stillness. Report. A tall Varelian general stepped forward. His silver armor glinted beneath the chamber's light. Your Majesty, the 7th Fleet has been annihilated near the Helios corridor. Lysera's eyes closed briefly. Another fleet gone. Another defensive line broken. The general continued. The Dravari Armada now outnumbers us 3-1. Murmurs spread across the council chamber. The Queen slowly turned. Her violet eyes carried both exhaustion and fury. 12 years, she said quietly. 12 years of war. 12 years of blood. And still neither side gains victory. An elderly advisor stepped forward. Your Majesty, the Dominion has proposed terms. The chamber stiffened. Peace terms from the Dravari were rarely anything but humiliation disguised as diplomacy. Lysera gestured. Speak. The advisor hesitated. They demand a political union. A union? Lysera repeated. Yes, Your Majesty. The advisor swallowed. The Dominion proposes a marriage alliance between our empire and a neutral third species. The Queen frowned. What species? The advisor activated a hologram. A strange figure appeared above the table. Tall. Broad-shouldered. 2 arms. 2 legs. No scales. No horns. Just a plain, oddly simple creature. Human, the advisor said. The chamber erupted in confused whispers. Humans were newcomers to the galactic stage. Their species had joined the interstellar community less than a century ago. They were considered unpredictable, primitive in some ways, yet strangely adaptable. But most importantly, they were neutral. The Dravari believed a political marriage involving a human could stabilize the war. Queen Lysera studied the hologram. A human, married into the Varelian royal line? The advisor nodded. The Dominion believed such a union would force both sides into a ceasefire treaty. Lysera crossed her arms. And who exactly is this human? Another hologram appeared. A man stood in the projection. Dark hair. Scar across his brow. Eyes calm and steady. Name Adrian Cole. Occupation, Independent Fleet Captain. Former, Human Military. Lysera studied the file. A soldier? Former soldier, the advisor corrected. Records say he left the human military after several classified campaigns. The Queen's voice hardened. So the fate of an empire rests on marrying a stranger? The advisor bowed his head. Without peace, our empire may fall within 2 years. Silence returned to the chamber. Lysera stared at the hologram of the human. He looked ordinary. No royal lineage. No noble background. Just a man. Yet somehow the galaxy believed this man could end a war. The Queen finally spoke. Bring him. 2 weeks later. The human ship entered orbit around Varelia Prime. Compared to Imperial vessels, it looked small and almost crude. But scans revealed something unusual. Its weapon systems had been modified far beyond standard human design. Inside the palace hangar, Queen Lysera waited with her royal guard. The airlock opened with a hiss. Footsteps echoed across the chamber. Then the human appeared. Adrian Cole stepped onto the polished floor with the calm confidence of someone who had walked into far more dangerous places. He wore simple combat armor. No decorations. No medals. Just a worn jacket and a quiet expression. The guards stiffened. Not out of hostility. Out of instinct. There was something about him. Something dangerous. Adrian glanced around the massive alien hall. Then he looked directly at the Queen. Your Majesty. His voice carried a calm respect, but no fear. Lysera studied him carefully. You traveled across half the galaxy for this meeting, she said. Yes. You know what we're asking of you? Yes. And you still came. Adrian shrugged slightly. You said it might stop a war. The Queen tilted her head. You don't seem particularly concerned about marrying an alien queen. Adrian smiled faintly. I've faced worse negotiations. Some of the royal guards exchanged uneasy glances. Lysera walked slowly down the steps of her throne. She stopped just a few feet from him. Up close, the human seemed even more composed. Most beings trembled in the presence of imperial authority. Adrian did not. Tell me something, Captain Cole, she said. Why would a human soldier agree to something like this? Adrian's eyes flickered briefly with memory. I've seen what war does. The room grew quiet. Planets burned, he continued. Cities turned into craters. People who never chose the fight paying the price. His gaze met hers. If marrying you ends that, seems like a good deal. Lysera studied him for several long seconds. Then she turned toward the council. Prepare the ceremony. Gasps echoed through the chamber. But the Queen had already made her decision. Within hours, the news spread across the galaxy. The Varelian Queen would marry a human. A political union to end the greatest war of the century. But far beyond the palace, in the dark reaches of space, Dravari warlords watched the announcement with interest. And one of them smiled. Because the war wasn't meant to end. Not yet. The wedding was broadcast across hundreds of star systems. On Varelia Prime, the palace gardens had been transformed into a ceremony ground large enough to hold ambassadors from dozens of civilizations. Floating platforms shimmered with holographic banners, and fleets from allied species hovered in orbit like silent witnesses. For many across the galaxy, it was more than a wedding. It was a gamble for peace. Queen Lysera stood beneath the towering silver arches of the royal ceremonial hall. Her gown shimmered like starlight, woven from the rare crystal fibers only grown in the oceans of Varelia Prime. Yet despite the elegance and grandeur surrounding her, her mind remained focused on one thing. The human. Adrian Cole stood across the hall, speaking quietly with a Varelian diplomat. He looked completely out of place among the ornate alien nobility. While everyone else wore ceremonial armor or elaborate robes, Adrian simply wore a dark formal suit provided by the palace. And yet, he carried himself with such calm authority that many guests found themselves watching him instead of the Queen. Lysera approached. You look uncomfortable, she said. Adrian glanced at the massive crowd. Not uncomfortable. Just unfamiliar. Human weddings aren't like this? Adrian chuckled softly. Human weddings usually involve fewer war fleets in orbit. Lysera almost smiled. The ceremony began moments later. An ancient Varelian priest stepped forward. Before the galaxy and the eternal stars, he declared, two leaders joined their fates so that war may end. The hall fell silent. Lysera and Adrian stepped toward one another. According to the treaty, the marriage symbolized unity between species and neutrality between empires. But the Dravari Dominion had demanded something else as well. Adrian would become royal war consort. A symbolic title. One that supposedly carried no military power. Lysera placed the ceremonial ring upon his hand. Adrian returned the gesture. The priest raised his arms. The union is sealed. Across the galaxy, billions watched. Hope stirred in places that had not known hope in years. Perhaps the war truly would end. But not everyone shared that hope. One day later, the celebration had barely ended when the first alarm sounded. Lysera rushed into the war chamber. What happened? A commander turned toward her, pale. Dravari fleets have crossed the Helios corridor. The Queen's eyes widened. That violates the ceasefire. Not according to them, the commander said grimly. They claim the treaty isn't active until the Union is fully recognized by the Galactic Council. Lysera clenched her fists. They're exploiting the delay. Adrian leaned casually against the war table, studying the holographic map. How many ships? 3,000. Lysera turned to him sharply. That's enough to destroy half our outer colonies. Adrian's expression remained calm. Then we stopped them. A general scoffed. Our fleets are still recovering from the last campaign. Adrian glanced at the tactical data. Your fleets are fighting the wrong way. The room fell silent. Lysera raised an eyebrow. Explain. Adrian pointed to several red fleet markers. The Dravari use aggressive wedge formations. They rely on overwhelming forward firepower. Yes, the general said. Everyone knows that. Adrian nodded. Which is why everyone keeps attacking them head-on. He tapped the map again. Instead, you break their formation. How? Adrian smiled slightly. By making them chase you. The Battle of Helios Corridor. The Dravari armada emerged from hyperspace like a storm of steel. Thousands of warships advanced in massive triangular formations. At their center stood the Dominion flagship Blood of Conquest. Admiral Karzul watched the battlefield with cruel satisfaction. The Varelians will break within hours. But something unexpected happened. The Varelian fleet didn't charge. Instead they retreated. Karzul frowned. Cowards. Shall we pursue? His officer asked. The admiral grinned. Of course. The Dravari armada surged forward. Exactly as Adrian predicted. Hidden beyond the asteroid fields surrounding the corridor, hundreds of smaller Varelian ships waited silently. Adrian stood aboard the command cruiser. Now. The trap snapped shut. Varelian ships emerged from every direction, striking the stretched Dravari formation. Missile storms erupted. Rail cannons tore through the Dominion's flanks. Within minutes, chaos spread across the enemy fleet. The Dravari wedge shattered. Admiral Karzul roared in fury. Regroup. Regroup. But it was too late. The legendary formation had been broken. Adrian watched the battlefield with quiet focus. Lysera stood beside him. You predicted this. Adrian shrugged. Humans fought wars like this long before we reached the stars. The Queen studied him with new curiosity. Just how many wars have you fought, Captain Cole? Adrian didn't answer. Instead he said quietly. Enough. Part 3, The Legend Awakens. The victory at Helios Corridor shocked the galaxy. For the first time in years, the Dravari Dominion had suffered a devastating defeat. And the strategist responsible was a human no one had taken seriously. Across the Empire, soldiers began whispering his name. Adrian Cole. The Queen's human consort. But the Dravari were not finished. Deep within their war council chamber, Admiral Karzul slammed his claws against the table. We underestimated the human. A warlord snarled. Then kill him. Karzul nodded slowly. Yes. He activated a star map. Prepare the Shadow Fleet. Gasps spread across the chamber. The Shadow Fleet was not meant for open war. It was used only for extermination. And now, it was coming for Varelia Prime. The Night of Assassins. 3 nights later, alarms erupted across the royal palace. Lysera awoke to the sound of explosions. Her guards rushed into the chamber. Your Majesty. Assassins. Dravari commandos had infiltrated the palace. Elite killers bred for war. Blaster fire echoed through the halls. Lysera reached for her weapon. But Adrian was already moving. His calm demeanor vanished. In its place appeared something far older. Far more dangerous. A warrior. He moved through the corridors with terrifying efficiency. 2 assassins charged him. Adrian disarmed one and dropped the other before they could fire. Lysera watched in stunned silence. You fight like a machine. Adrian reloaded his weapon. No. His voice was cold now. I fight like a human. Within minutes, the palace attackers were neutralized. But the message was clear. The Dominion wanted him dead. Lysera looked at him carefully. You weren't just a soldier, were you? Adrian hesitated. Then sighed. Black Fleet Command. Her eyes widened. Human Black Fleet units were legendary. Elite special forces trained for the most dangerous operations in the galaxy. You were one of them? Adrian nodded. Used to be. Lysera stared at him. So the man I married to stop a war. Is someone trained to win them? Adrian finished. Part 4. The war ends. The Shadow Fleet arrived 2 weeks later. 5,000 warships. Enough to annihilate Varelia Prime. Across the Empire, panic spread. But Adrian remained calm. Standing beside Queen Lysera on the command bridge, he watched the approaching armada. They're here for me, he said. Then we fight them together, Lysera replied. Adrian smiled faintly. For the record, this wasn't the honeymoon I expected. The Queen laughed despite the looming battle. Win this war and we'll discuss better vacation options. The battle began. Dravari ships poured fire into the Varelian defenses. But Adrian had prepared something new. Human tactics. Human unpredictability. Using smaller strike craft and electronic warfare, Varelian fleets disrupted the Dominion's targeting systems. Then the human revealed his final strategy. Hidden fleets jumped from hyperspace behind the enemy. The Shadow Fleet found itself trapped. Adrian leaned forward. Signal all ships. The message echoed across the battlefield. Human strategy, hammer and anvil. The Varelians became the hammer. The hidden fleets became the anvil. The Dravari armada was crushed between them. Hours later, the battlefield fell silent. The Shadow Fleet was gone. Destroyed. Across the galaxy, the news spread like wildfire. The Dravari Dominion had lost its most powerful fleet. The war was over. Epilogue. Months later, peace treaties were signed across the galaxy. The war that had lasted 12 years ended not with a final battle, but with a marriage. Queen Lysera stood beside Adrian on the balcony overlooking Varelia Prime. You changed the course of history, she said. Adrian shook his head. No. He gestured to the peaceful world below. We did. The Queen smiled. When I married you, I expected a political symbol. Adrian looked at her. And instead, Lysera laughed softly. Instead I married a legend. Adrian shrugged. Humans prefer the term problem solver. Far above them, the stars burned quietly. And across the galaxy, a new story spread among countless worlds. The story of the war that ended, because one queen married a human, and discovered too late. He wasn't just a husband. He was a legendary warrior.